Okay, so today is our fourth lesson in Megillat Esther, and it is a very interesting and challenging sefer that we are learning. We think of it as a children's story, but it is hardly that. And last week, we read in our text about the second party. The second party was a 7-day party that was held in the palace by King Ahasuerus after the 180-day party. And the 7-day party was for the residents of Shushan, the capital. And the party in Hebrew, we get that in English that it's a feast, but it is actually a mishkeh. A mishkeh is the Hebrew word for drink, shtia, lishtot. And what we have here are drinking parties. So this was another week-long drinking party for the men of Shushan. The women were entertained by Vashti, the queen, in her chambers away from the men. And the second party was held not inside the palace, but outside in the courtyards and gardens of the palace, which were decorated extremely lavishly. We get a very interesting perspective of what it looked like, the grandeur, the colors, the tiles, the fabrics, the rods that hold the silver and gold rods that hold the curtains that are floating in the air. And we get a glimpse of all of the kalim that they have as serving pieces and the cups, the wine cups, and they are mostly from the kalim from the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. Now, could everybody mute themselves so that we don't hear wind and noise and all kinds of stuff, please? It just makes it easier for me and for everyone to hear. Thank you. Feel free to ask any questions and unmute yourself. I'm always happy to take questions.
You said that King Ahasuerus had inherited the stuff that was taken from the temple.
Yes, he had gotten from when the Babylonians took it from the temple and he conquered the Babylonians, then he takes it over and it goes in his treasury and storage wherever. Now, the interesting thing is that when we read about the grandeur of the palace, Rav Yaakov Medan, who is currently a rabbi in the Gush here in Israel, points out that the colors, the description, the techelet, the blue, the lavan, the white curtains, the gold rods that held the curtains, the colors, the way the courtyard was designed and the flooring, these are all allusions alluding to the temple in Jerusalem, the Beit HaMikdash. And he says that the Jews who had come to the party should have recognized that King Ahasuerus' palace was similar in description and looks to the Beit HaMikdash, but that the king of Persia, King Ahasuerus, was not the king of the Jews. And this whole description that Rav Medan talks about is alluding to the fact that the Jews should not have been in Persia, they should have been in Israel when Cyrus the Great had given everybody permission, all the Jews permission to go home. And so he says that the descriptiveness of all of this could not be really written in detail about the Beit HaMikdash because of the censors, the Persian censors, because this was a Persian document, but it all alluded to the fact that the Jews should not have been there at all, and that the reason for all of this story is that it is the sin of the Jews to still be in Persia. That's a pretty powerful sentiment, and I have felt that way all along. What were they doing in Persia after they were liberated from exile and told they could go home? Anyway, to continue, we learn about the drinking, because the reason we get such a huge description of the kind of drinking party this was to show that the king was being very generous, he was being noble, he was being a great host to all those who came to his party, because he wanted everyone to like him and everyone to be happy that they were part of the Persian Empire. There were rules and regulations about drinking that the Persians had, but all those rules were suspended by the king in order to make everyone happy. So no one was coerced to drink anything they didn't want to, or to consume anything they didn't want to. So the king looks as if he is quite the host. Now, the concept here is that everyone should be comfortable and everyone has a place in King Ahasuerus's kingdom, which was how he wanted to portray in the party, the extended parties that he had. After all, happy citizens are loyal citizens, and that's exactly what the king wanted. The parties were to endear his countrymen to him, and they should like him and feel loyal to him. The laws of, like I said, of drinking were suspended. Everyone was relaxed and felt special. Everyone was not forced to do anything they did not want. Interestingly enough, except for one person. Okay, right. Okay, so we're going to take a look at that everyone at the party was allowed to do and feel the way they wanted, except two people, and I'm going to describe to discuss that soon. So, having said that, if you think about it, everyone at the parties, the 180-day party and the 7-day party, get exactly what they want. That was the king's orders, except the king. The king does not get what he wants. When he asks Vashti to appear before him, she refuses him. Vashti refuses to come to the king by his demand, and we don't know if she was asked to come unclothed. It does not say in the text all those things about her coming unclothed, her getting blemishes, her breaking all. I mean, there are hundreds of different midrashim about why she didn't come, what she didn't come for. They are all midrash, made up stories. The text tells us the king invites her to come to be introduced to the party wearing her crown. Now, the fact that it says wearing the crown, it doesn't say wearing your royal robes, etc., gives license to whomever to create all kinds of midrash. Now, just the request to wear her crown, wearing just that, and we don't know anything else, to come to his drinking party, and to leave her own guests. By doing so, she would have to leave her guests, which she was entertaining in her chambers. Her coming to the party because the king was a little drunk was not done in those days. The women, the royal women, not the concubines, but the royal women, did not come to those parties. They did not participate in those parties because they were called mishted, drinking parties. They were really basically drunken brawls with lewd and sordid entertainment for the men, and women of ill repute were brought in. So all kinds of things were happening at these parties that the royal women were not part of. So how do we know that that her coming to and being invited and coming to the party, and why she didn't come when summoned by Achashverosh, was a matter of tradition, and that it was really okay for her not to come? Well, we get a glimpse of why she is not supposed to be there if we look in Sefer Daniel in chapter 5, verses 1 through 10. It says, King Belshazzar, do we remember that Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, the last Babylonian king, who made a great feast for his 1,000, and this also, what I'm reading, it's interesting, this is the kind of party that Achashverosh is giving, the same kind of party that Belshazzar gave, and it describes the party basically the same as the party that Achashverosh is giving it, and it uses the word, it says great feast, but it's a mishteh also, it's a drinking party. So Belshazzar makes a great feast for his 1,000 dignitaries, same as Achashverosh, dignitaries, nobles, etc. And he drank as much wine as the 1,000. So the wine was flowing, people were drunk. Belshazzar said, with the counsel of the wine, in other words, the wine affected him, to bring the gold and silver vessels that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple that was in Jerusalem, that the king, his women, his dignitaries, and his concubines should drink from them. He doesn't mention the queen. Now, the English translation at the time in Sefer Daniel is that the queens, plural. Well, there weren't queens. There was one queen, and the real Hebrew word refers to his women. So these are women that he had perhaps in his harem, in addition to his concubines. So these are not royal women that are sitting there at the men's drinking party. Verse 9 says the king becomes very frightened because he sees the handwriting on the wall. Remember that story where he's having the party and he sees a hand coming and writing on the wall. Pasuk 10 says, the queen, in response to the words of the king is frightened, doesn't know what to do, and he looks at his dignitaries very perplexed. she, the queen, in response to the words of the king and his dignitaries, entered the banquet hall. In other words, the queen was not in the banquet hall during this party. And this gives us very good detail that queens did not come to those drunken brawls. So it was in Vashti's best interest to do as all queens did and not go to the drinking party, even if the king says, come. This was just not done. It was not her place to be there. So given the fact that Sefer Daniel gives us a glimpse of what the parties were like, even in Babylonia, which sounds very similar to the one in Persia, we understand that the queen did not have to be there. So she had every right to refuse. So the word in the text that we learn in Pasuk 12 in Sefer Megillat Esther is that she forcefully or strongly refuses to come to the king's party. The word that she uses is v'tema ayin, forcefully refuses. This is the same word that Yosef, the brothers back in Tanakh, that Yosef says to refuse Potiphar's wife. He says the same word, v'yima ayin. It's just one is male, one is female. Forcefully refuses Potiphar's wife. Interestingly enough, both of these characters are described as beautiful. Both Yosef and Vashti, beautiful human beings. Their outward appearances are gorgeous. And the similarities is that Vashti gets kicked out of the palace and Yosef gets kicked out of Potiphar's house and sent to jail because they forcefully refuse to do something that they know they should not be doing. It's a very interesting concept. The story of Yosef, Daniel, and Esther are all very similar in many of their phrases and their concepts, and are really linked by the fact that they are describing the Jews in exile. We have to keep that in mind because if we continually understand that the Jews should not have been in Persia, we understand more and more of what happens throughout the text of Megillat Esther. Now, yes.
That's interesting, Ronda, because the Jews shouldn't have been in Egypt either. They should have gone home after the famine.
That's right. That's right.
That's a good point.
Yes, you're right.
Rhonda, I had, it's somewhere in learning about Megillat Esther, I had heard that the Vashti was killed. Do we know for a fact, I mean, do we have proof of where she went, or was she just vanished, or what? Nothing tells us.
It says that she is not allowed to come before the king again. That's
Okay.
all it says. The fact that people think is she was killed, she was her head cut off, or she was exiled, no one knows from the text. It is all midrash.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off and read the rest of the chapter. So we left off at Pasuk
10. On the 10th one.
Okay, let's go to Pasuk. Okay, let's go to Pasuk 13.
What chapter is that?
What?
What chapter?
Chapter 1,
Oh,
Pasuk 13.
thank you.
Okay. Do I have a reader? Xenia, could you read for us, please?
Sure, okay. You said 13?
Yes.
Okay. Then the king consulted the sages learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were versed in law and precedent. His closest advisor were Harshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maris, Marcina, and Mumachan. The 7 ministers of Persia and Media who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom. What he asked shall be done according to law to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs. Do you want me to go on?
Yep.
Okay. Thereupon, Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end to the scorn and provocation. If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike. The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in its own script, and to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people.
Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. Now, let me ask you a question. If you got a letter in the mail from the king of your country or the president of your country or the prime minister saying, your husband is the king of the castle and your wife should be dutiful and obedient, thus says the king, what would you think?
Oh,
It's a joke.
It's a joke, okay?
But Rhonda, were those things more prevalent in those days to get proclamations like that from the king? No, was that like outlandish?
It would be, don't you think that all the kings and all the emperors had other things to do other than tell every husband that they were the king in their own castle, to tell them how their wife should behave? It wasn't like there was a 1,000,000-man march on Shushan that all the husbands were upset with their wives. We weren't going through the wives burning their bras and saying, I'm not going to cook for you anymore. This was absurd. This was crazy. The fact that Memucan, and I'm only going to say that this is midrash, that it is Haman. It is not necessarily Haman, but the truth is, I believe it could very well be Haman, and I'll tell you why. Because the proclamation that he suggests to the king is as foolish and unfounded as the proclamation that he suggests the king send out about the killing of the Jews. And when we get to that, you'll see in the text that it is so outlandish that how could the king agree to either one of these? So I'm prepared to show you that it wasn't necessarily King Ahasuerus who's the fool, but really the fool here in terms of thought processes is Haman. After reading a lot about him and what he says and does, I think he has some real psychological issues and he has some real problems in the intellect department.
Can I play devil's advocate to you, Rhonda?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I'm concerned that Ahasuerus was insulted by his wife. And as a result, he didn't want the men in his kingdom to have similar experiences. So there may have been a reason for him sending out such a proclamation to say to these men, you are the dominant person in your household. And what Vashti did to me was an insult, and I don't want it to happen to anybody else. I'm just taking another side.
Oh, that's fine. That's absolutely fine, and it's very legitimate. In fact, there are many the Mefarshim, the commentators, who say the same thing, that everybody would see this as the refusal of Vashti to the king as license for any wife to refuse her husband. Now, having said that,
Rhonda,
yes,
but even today, we have many Arabs in certain countries where the women know that that they have
The
no
men's
say,
are the
the men are
boss.
head of the household. So like, I don't know why he's so foolish when we still have that today. I mean, the Jewish women would know he was foolish. But the other Persians, you know,
Excuse me, and Rhonda and the
Yeah.
Jewish men would know it also.
exactly. That's right. That's
But
We are looking through it through modern eyes.
right. Exactly.
yes,
But it is, like I said, it was not an issue throughout the kingdom, and certainly it was 127 provinces, which mean countries.
Right.
And each country certainly had their own laws and rules and customs and whatever. And the households of everyone who lived in different, and from India to Ethiopia had different laws and customs. And so this whole thing is a matter of smokescreen, and trying to make the king feel better about his disappointment that the queen did not come.
Rhonda,
Yeah.
can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Was this the only idea, like from this person, if he was a man? Were there no other ideas, or this is the only one that we know about?
Well, this is the one that was suggested first. It said
Okay.
he spoke up first,
Right,
and it says the king liked the idea, so he didn't have to even go any further to ask
Right.
anybody else.
I see, okay.
Because it names the people in his cabinet, it names the officers that were close to him. They had legal training in law and justice, so they knew exactly what needed to be done. So here we find that the decree that is suggested by Memucan, well, King Ahasuerus is requiring every husband to be the thing that he wasn't able to do. Here was the king. He wanted to be in charge of his own wife at his own party, but he wasn't able to. everybody got what they wanted except for the king.
Right.
Everybody got what they wanted except for Vashti. She said no, but there were serious consequences. Now, the writers of the Megillah could not put more detail about this in the text because it was censored. It was a document, like I mentioned, I want you to understand this repeatedly, that it was a document that was a Persian document. It went out to all the citizens, and consequently, had they put anything more about the king or Vashti without just alluding to different words, it would not have passed the censors. So having said that, why couldn't King Ahasuerus make his own decision about what to do with Vashti? After all, he was the king. The questions could be answered that he'd rather have someone else make the decision because he was too drunk to think straight.
I was, yeah.
Maybe when it concerned the fate of his wife, he did not want to make that judgment call. It could be that the way the government was run at the time was by consulting the inner cabinet of trusted advisors to the king, and let them make the decisions, so that he knew these people knew the law, they knew the justice of the empire, and they could make the decisions.
Okay,
yeah.
but she was royalty unto herself. And maybe you didn't want to mess with that.
Well, that's okay. That's also part of it, but and there are other reasons. It could be that he didn't want to decide the fate of his wife that he loved. He may have loved her, but he knew that something had to be done. That right then and there, he had been maligned, and he had to do something. But here's a woman he loved, and maybe he didn't want to make a decision and doom her to being vilified and exiled. So whether we look at him as being weak or foolish, we can make that decision based on what we read in the text. But the fact is, he allowed Memucan's decision and decree to go forward in his name. So Memucan takes a small, unimportant concept, an incident of the queen not appearing to the party by demand of the king, and he turns it into a national crisis. You know, there was only the people of Shushan there. Would they have written to the people in Ethiopia and said, or to India and said, you know what? I was at the party of the king last week, and the queen wouldn't come when the king demanded it. So I guess I can feel like my wife won't come. Do you see the irony, the foolishness of all this? It wasn't as if it was a big deal, but Memucan makes it a big deal, and he turns it into a national crisis. By making a big deal out of this issue, we wonder whether the king is made to look foolish or petty, because all of this is considered a national emergency. All of a sudden, that every scribe in every language has to write this decree, get the stamp, and it has to be immediately sent out to all the provinces. I mean, really, it's how silly does this sound? So Memucan has solved the king's dilemma. and he has actually resolved the issue of Vashti. Now, it's very, very interesting to note that when we read in chapter 4 about Esther refusing to come, refusing Mordecai's, he says to her, you have to go to the king. You have to go to the king and demand that he rescind the decree to kill the Jewish people. What does that sound like? You have to go to the king. It sounds just like
It's the same thing he's telling her is what
yes,
happened to the king.
happened with King Ahasuerus and Vashti. So because Esther knows what happened to Vashti, she didn't live in a vacuum. Everyone knew what happened to Vashti. She had every right to say to Mordecai, oh no, I don't want to go to the king. Look what happened to my predecessor. So she had a legitimate concern to say to Mordecai, no, I haven't been summoned. I don't want to go before the king because I know what can happen to me. And it was the fact that she knew that gave her every right to be able to say no to Mordecai.
Rhonda?
Yes.
Okay, I see it not as a foolish thing on Haman's part and Achashverosh. I see it as a control thing, and you have advisors, be they bad or good, to give you another perspective. So while he may not have, or we don't think it's a big deal that she didn't want to come and it's the precedent and all that, when he has advisors that say, hey, this is what could happen, and he took it, yeah, you know, it might. And so I have to do this as the leader, okay? With Mordecai, when he tells Esther that it's not just the Jews, I mean, she's a Jew. She has to realize it. It's like boing, you know, she knew it, but it had to be said. She might have come to the conclusion on her own that no matter what happens to me, I have to go help my people, you know, but I think people have advisors because they can't think of everything, especially in a moment of crisis. Okay, to the king at the party, it was a crisis that she didn't come. And he sought the opinions, and to him that sounded good. It sounded strong, and it made every man strong. The men were strong in all the societies, you know, all the time, you know. So it's not an outrageous thought, let's keep them down, because look what will happen.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Very good. Thank you. Okay.
That was good.
That was fine. That's very good. Okay. So basically we have covered all of the information that we have in the chapter. Memuchan continues to go on and on and on for several paragraphs through until the end of chapter 1. He has quite a lengthy speech here. And we come to the end of chapter 1, which really is ends with the decree that the king sends out about his about every man being the king in his own home. So let's summarize chapter 1 before we move on to chapter 2. King Ahasuerus can't make decisions, even though he thinks he is all powerful. The King Ahasuerus may seem so nice and accommodating to all his guests, but he himself at his grandiose party can't get what he wants. The second thing is the perspective we learn. The Jews are there in Persia when they should be in Eretz Yisrael. and that is their sin, which the story of Megillat Esther is all about. 3, Vashti shows us the severity of what Esther is up against, and that Esther, and I mentioned this already, and that in chapter 4 says she doesn't want to go to the king because she's afraid that she might be killed or whatever happened to Vashti. Now, I wanted to spend a moment talking to you about Midrash, and because it's very interesting that as I read more and more in the text, I see more and more Midrash, and it gives me a glimpse of how stories pop up throughout the ages. Every Midrash that we hear about is not has not been written in one generation. They're throughout all the generations. And these Midrashic tales or stories were developed because perhaps a rabbi in a community had a particular issue with modesty. Let's pick that, modesty.
Mhm.
And so he picks a pasuk in about Vashti not coming to the king, and he turns that whole story about her not coming into a lesson that he wants to teach his community about. And that is what Midrash is all about. So while I feel that Midrash can sometimes cloud the actual text, I wanted to show you through one of the psukim I sent to you exactly how Midrash becomes how it becomes what it becomes. So let's go to the text that I sent you. I'm trying to find that.
You want this? It's very long.
Have it.
I have it here, Rhonda.
Okay, so read the
I
text.
also have it.
Go ahead, read the text that I sent you.
Okay, with discussion of Pasuk 113, Megillat Esther. The
Okay.
king spoke to his wise men who knew the times, for it was the king's custom to place such matters before all who knew law and justice. You want me to read from the Chronicle thing that you
Now,
sent?
Okay, so it says he consulted with the men of the time who knew the times and law and justice. So it doesn't say in that particular sentence who they were.
Right.
So somebody says, oh, the men who know the times, the meaning the times that they were living in,
Mhm.
and they knew about the law and justice. And
Right.
so somebody, maybe a legal commentator, now says, oh, I've heard that before. I've heard that sentence before. And the person looks and looks through text, and he finds in Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, a pasuk that talks about, go ahead, read the pasuk from Divrei Hayamim.
And the sons of Issachar, those who had an understanding of the times, to know what Israel should do, their chiefs were 200, and all their brethren obeyed their word.
So here's a pasuk that says the tribe of Issachar
Right.
are the people who know the times and that people obeyed them. So someone could say, oh, the king, the hidden meaning of this sentence in Megillat Esther, that he consulted with those who knew the times, he must have sought out the people from the tribe of Issachar.
Not necessarily.
Well,
That's one example, but maybe there are other ones that we didn't hear about.
exactly, but I wanted to point that out, that while I'm reading all this,
Right.
and you know, I refer to what the commentators are saying, that one kind of stuck out in my head because it was an easy one to show you.
Right.
However, if you continue to read the line, what pasuk was it in Megillat Esther?
10,
1:13,
10.
chapter 1,
Right.
verse 13. It says.
So if you stop at that one point, you could say, oh, well, who were those wise men that he consulted? But if you
Right.
continue, the next line tells you who he consulted, and it was the 7 people in his like cabinet, or 7 advisors.
Right.
So that's why I'm telling you that we have to be very, very careful when we read Midrash, not to say, oh, that's the truth. That's the reason.
Right.
It really is not necessarily the reason. It becomes a story based on a pasuk that sounds good, that has potential, that perhaps words were hidden or concealed, and so therefore this is it. You cannot, the emphasis here is that I want to stick mostly to text. Where there is midrash that I feel is interesting, I'll share it with you, but it gets very, very muddled if you listen to every single one of the stories that is made up about each of the pasukim. So having said that, we can move on. To what time? Okay, so we,
Just, wait a minute, just quickly,
yes.
because I have a Megillah here in front of me. It's an art scroll,
Mhm.
and it has the Hebrew and the English, and then it has commentary
Yeah,
from Talmud, from Midrash.
right,
And so it says, and this is where kids will get this. Vashti is deposed. And it says, he gave the order and they brought in her head on a platter. Be'emet, it's written there in black and white. All right?
right.
So it's hard, it's wonderful to listen to understand that Midrash is Agadah and stories. But if you're a child or an unknowing reading this, it's Be'emet. She was decapitated, Be'emet.
Right, right. Well,
yeah.
you know, it's very interesting. Okay, so you know what? Let's hold on one second. So I think what we're gonna do. Where do I'm going to end the recording and then we can talk. All right, stop.